attendees are popping up. Hello to everybody who is joining us today. This is the Meet the Children's Book Reviewers online event. Really love to see lots of you popping up in the attendees button at the moment. I'm just going to wait a little while longer until more of you have joined. Okay, that seems to be slowing down a bit. So yeah, hello again. This is the Meet the Children's Book Reviewers event. It's really nice to kind of see you all with us tonight. We've got Nicolette Jones, Fiona Noble and Imogen Russell-Williams. I'm going to ask some questions and we're going to have a little chat. And at the end, please put your questions into the chat box. And I will you panelists, you don't go for the questions. I'll read out the ones which I think will be good to talk about. If anyone has any issues with the chat function, I've got my phone, so you can always tweet me at Charlotte L. Eyre. So I'll stop talking. You haven't come to hear me, and I've got a horrible cold anyway. So my first question to you guys is, can you tell us, introduce yourselves and tell us about which media outlets you write for? Imogen, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I'm Imogen Russell-Williams and I write a monthly column for The Guardian. I write roundups for the Times Literary Supplement and I sometimes write for the Metro, but sadly not at the moment because advertising revenue has plummeted, so they're not really commissioning book reviews.
Oh, where the world, isn't it? Nicolette?
Nicolette Jones. My main outlet is the weekly children's book review on the Sunday Times. Which is in fact two. It's a children's book of the week and a watch out for, which gives me about 50 words to mention something else. In theory, because I'm freelance, I can also write for other places and I have written for all the other broadsheets, but I don't want to step on anybody else's toes, so I'm quite careful about that. Other than that, you know, I write for Books for Keeps. I write for all sorts of other odd papers that might commission me. But it's really the weekly slot at the Sunday Times I expect you're interested in.
And Fiona?
Hi, I'm Fiona Noble. So my main thing is writing the monthly previews for the Bookseller, where I preview forthcoming children's and YA titles. And that goes out every month. And on a quarterly basis, I round up teenage and YA books for The Observer. So that's 4 times a year and usually books of the year at Christmas.
Now, Fiona, obviously the Bookseller and The Observer have quite different audiences. So do you want to talk about who those audiences are and what you're thinking about when you're trying to find books for them?
Okay, so the Bookseller is the most different probably to everything else that we're going to talk about this evening because it's very much a trade audience. So I think we write the previews to help booksellers make their buying decisions, I suppose, but they are also read by, I would say, other retailers, librarians, journalists, all kinds of people right across publishing. So it's kind of like a one-stop, see what's coming, and it is right across the genres. And it's non-fiction, it might be activity books. I've just been writing about annuals this week. So it's all kinds of things. So I'm thinking very much, you know, I'm not just thinking about the literary merit of a book, I'm thinking about where it's going to sit in the market, about the commercial aspects, what the jacket looks like, what the marketing plan is. So I think that would be a very big difference to what I'm doing, say, for The Observer, which is much more about, you know, the literary merit of a book. Although at the same time, then I am still thinking about appealing, finding books for all sorts of different readers within that category, I would say.
And when you're thinking about the commercial interests or, you know, people from the business looking at your book, so that's obviously Waterstones, independent bookshops. Are you also thinking librarians, supermarkets even?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, probably supermarkets a bit less so, but I certainly would feature all the books that you would expect to see in supermarkets. And I get lots of feedback from librarians, from independent bookshops, even from teachers and schools, who I think quite often they perhaps see the reviews on Twitter rather than perhaps in the magazine itself. So it is a very sort of broad readership.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Imogen, how about you? Who's your audiences and what do they want?
Well, I think my Guardian readers, as far as I know, are mainly sort of parents, teachers, librarians to carers, relatives who might buy books for children, and people who are just generally interested in children's books, so authors and so on. They mostly want to know about books which will suit and interest individual kids, or maybe sit well within a topic on the curriculum, something like that. Metro was brilliant because kids and teenagers actually sometimes read those reviews on their way to school, on the bus or wherever. So that was much more, shall we say, directly communicating with the end user, which was something I really liked about it. The TLS, obviously, the clue is sort of in the name. It's more literary, but it's not necessarily just sort of incredibly literary books that I choose to cover for the TLS. They just have to be really good, according to me, of their kind, whatever that is.
Nicolette, could you talk to us a little bit about, it's sort of quite a general question, but are there any particular trends that you're seeing coming through at the moment?
Oh, right, I wanted to answer that question about the audience, if I might. Can I just say something about that first? I mean, I realised that when I said it's really only the Sunday Times, that isn't quite true, because it's also different parts of the paper. Sometimes it's news stories and sometimes it's features, or the magazine and so on, which also makes a bit of a difference. And of course, you're also talking about children's books on social media, and occasionally it has been known on the radio, and there are all kinds of other potential outlets. As far as who the readers of the Sunday Times go, in theory there's a readership of 16 million people, according to a news story in June last year which said that digital subscriptions were up 88%. That's what they think their reach is, and obviously that's making an assumption beyond the subscriptions they actually know they have. That story also said that the Times reached, it was the Sunday Times and the Times together, but the Times reached 850,000 people. So it suggests an awful lot more. But then when you look up the circulation of the Sunday Times on Wikipedia, it tells you that it has a circulation of 650,000. Which is rather less, and that it's 75% more than the Times. So the whole point about all these figures is that really it's very difficult to generalize about your readers, because there are an awful lot of them, is the point. And the circulation is a bit of a mystery to me, and they don't tell me either. I think, like Imogen, it's everybody. It's parents, carers, teachers, librarians, booksellers, grandparents, godparents, writers, illustrators, anybody who knows or has ever met a child, or is interested in literature and art, or indeed somebody whose eye might happen to fall on quite a small paragraph. So I think what they want is an interesting paragraph to read, and then they want to find books that are good of their kind, which I think is what I'm aiming for. Trends, you want to know about trends. Let me move to that. The good news is we are seeing, I think, more inclusive books. There's a long way to go. We know the statistics are telling us, but we are seeing more than, say, 20 years ago, images of, say, children of colour or children in wheelchairs or whatever on the jackets of books. So that's been a very good trend. I think there's been a lot of books too about empathy and kindness and feelings and community, and the big issues of the day, immigration and refugees, about being different, books about nature and the environment and activism and how to save the planet. What I feel is that children's books at the moment are working very hard to make the world a better place. Gender identity, big theme, and sexuality, especially but not exclusively in YA, but also in middle grade books. So all of those things are very good. It's hard to generalize about trends because, of course, everything is available. But I think we're seeing more sort of history and fantasy and travel and adventure, and possibly slightly less dystopia. more sort of different cultures and different kinds of experiences. And of course, more books by celebrities.
I mean, we will get on to celebrity authors, but I'm not going to ask you to be rude about anyone, of course. Imogen, would you sort of agree with Nicolette summing up of the books that are coming through at the moment?
I definitely would. I agree that it's just glorious to see so many more authors of colour and authors, marginalised authors generally. I would add a small caveat to the effect that sometimes I feel that publishers have bought a book by an author from a marginalised group, and sometimes they've rushed it out without providing the editorial support that would have showcased the full potential of that book. And I think that's a pity, because obviously you only get one shot at a first impression, and you shouldn't squander that. So, you know, if a couple more drafts and a bit more fine-tuning would have really brought out the lustre of that book, I think it's a shame to scamp on that. I agree with Nicolette, certainly broadly about trends. There's plenty of orphans and magical fantasy doing the rounds as well, but I don't think they ever quite go away. And obviously lots of detective and mystery. And yes, when you get dystopia, it tends to be more of the climate catastrophe kind of dystopia and recovery from the more, yes, post-apocalyptic, I suppose, in a way, but again, often a very hopeful feel, more of a sense of there are things that we can do and things that we can still preserve and save, rather than just let's all despair, because obviously that gets nothing done.
Okay. And Fiona, are there types of books or subjects or themes that you would like to see more of coming through to you?
Well, I think we're sort of just at the beginning on the, on the whole idea of more inclusive books. So I think the big, really significant change I feel has been the types of books that are being published by authors of colour. You know, a few years ago, where those books existed, you know, they tended to be on very serious topics, and now we're seeing, you know, sci-fi, fantasy. It's much more, I would say, kind of child focused and much more commercial. So I think we need even more of that. I know Mallory Blackman has often spoken about how she always wanted to write, you know, sci-fi novels, and she was always pushed in a different direction. So I hope that is something that, you know, that will continue to see publisher investment in. I think it's, you know, looking at gaps in the market when there are such an unfathomable number of books published, it's quite hard to pick areas that perhaps are not so many books. But the one area I would pick out is the kind of younger teen books, say for years 7 and 8, which I think is kind of oddly underserved. Massively less than the older YA, and it's often a very tricky time in children's lives, where they're, you know, moving to secondary school, navigating that change. And I feel there's relatively little, and there's all the big series that were around maybe a decade ago. There's all of that has really gone, so I feel that is quite a gap. And I would just like to see more and more of the fabulous non-fiction that we've seen over the past few years, which just continues to be such an area of innovation. I would pick out a couple from this summer that I'm really, I think are really good examples of Rashmi Pandy's Good News, and then Abigail Balfe, A Different Sort of Normal, which are both just really fresh and innovative non-fiction. So more of that, really, yeah.
Yes, you beat me to it, actually, Fiona. I was going to say the same, that I really like, and the one thing that I think they should be more of is non-fiction with a narrative, you know, things that are not just sort of sound bites of facts. Those can be done very beautifully. You know, there's a lot of beautifully illustrated non-fiction even in that category at the moment. But there's a kind of inventiveness going on around non-fiction, and there's more possibilities and more possibility of wrapping story and art around facts. And I think that's a really good trend we should see more of.
Now, I think it's fair to say that a large part of all your jobs is sort of recommending books. You're sort of recommending books that you love. You are talking about them with a critical eye, but you are essentially picking something that you really like. Now, do you think there should be space in the media to write critiques of children's books that could potentially be negative, or would that not be helpful? Nicolette, what do you think?
Well, I think there should be more space, full stop, to talk about books in more detail, certainly. But yes, it would be great if we could be more negative, if there was room to, I mean, even with books that you like, it would be nice to be able to say this part didn't work as well, and often there isn't the space to do that. I've often thought it'd be quite fun to do the worst children's book of the week, but and you know, if somebody commissioned me to do that, I'd do it. But it has the disadvantage now that when the space is so limited, you'd be promoting something that didn't deserve to be promoted, and that's a shame. I mean, I think it's enjoyable to write negative reviews, and you know, I'm sort of sad not to get more opportunity. I used to have more opportunity when writing reviewing adult books, and I think in fact I can remember once an agent telling me that their author wanted to kneecap me. So those are the good old days when you it's sufficiently disparaging for that to happen. But no, sadly, I think what you want is a serious kind of discussion, and Imogen does it in the TLS sometimes when she has a little bit more space to actually kind of analyze the books in a bit more detail. But even so, in a roundup, it's always limited. And you know, it would be lovely to have whole pages. Occasionally, I've done it, incidentally, where there was a book that was of sufficient interest for them to commission a longer piece. So, for instance, I do remember being quite rude about the third book of the Twilight series, and getting a lot of sort of hate mail from teenagers, or hate messages online. She doesn't remember what it's like to be a teenager, which I enjoyed very much because I was right. I mean, it was I remember being particularly cross about the fetus that talks to you as soon as it's conceived, and the whole notion that if you had sex with a vampire, it might be violent enough to kill you, and it is quite violent, but that it turns out to be lovely after all. You know, some very dodgy stuff going on in that book, I thought.
Yeah, I think a lot of those teenagers would probably look back at it now and go, "Oh God, yeah, that was really."
I think so. They've grown up to know that I was right.
Yeah, Imogen, tell us a bit about those TLS pieces and what you're looking for when you're being a bit more analytical.
I must also just virtually high five Nicolette, because I wrote an absolute hatchet job on The Short Second Life of Bree Tanner, and the Twihards came for me. They really did.
They do.
But it was one of the most enjoyable things I've ever written, truly. It is enormously satisfying to have a bit more space. Usually I theme the TLS roundups, and so it's just, again, it's more interesting to be able to say, rather than just this is an overview of what's out this month, this is a broader, perhaps something that might be going on in children's literature and YA literature. And there is a little bit more space that I can say, as I said earlier, when I think that a book is underdeveloped, when I think it's not quite finished, or a bit of it, as Nicolette says, hasn't been entirely successful, even if it's just a line in which I can say that. I mean, I choose to believe that authors are reflective people who want to improve their craft anyway, and it really doesn't serve anyone if all you ever get is relentless positivity and silence. We do need some nuanced actual criticism. It is our job. Yes,
that's true, and sometimes it's a word that expresses something, and it is very, you know, what you don't want is just gush. You don't want advertorial. So that's part of the job, isn't it, to try and make this expressed in a very tiny amount of space, which we all have. Yeah, you're right. Then, but you know, at least there can be a debate around that first nugget sometimes on some platform or another.
Let's talk about some of the practicalities and what, you know, publishers can do to get their books in front of you. So Fiona, tell us about, first of all, what's your deadline, and what can publishers do to attract you with? Is it a press release? Is it a nice proof? I mean, what is it that makes you go, I'm going to read that one?
So for the bookseller, I work a long way ahead. So I ask for submissions 4 months in advance, and then the actual preview goes out 3 months ahead of the month. So I have just finished August, and I'm now working on September books. And that is broadly to time with retailer buying patterns. So if you have September books, which I haven't seen yet, now is the time to send me what you can. And I appreciate at this stage there may not be a huge amount of material to send. So I ask for an advance information sheet and a PDF of any materials you can supply, or if you have a bound proof, to send that. And since the pandemic, I've been working largely digitally, but I do like, if you have bound proofs, I do like those. So for the bookseller, I get sent, you know, quite literally hundreds of AIs every month. So what I ask publishers to do, particularly if they have a lot of books coming, is to send a covering letter which picks out the titles that they really believe in the most. And I think sometimes people are reluctant to do that because they don't want to be seen to favour one above another. But you know, there really are so many books that you need to do that, to make those titles stand out. I do like a nice looking proof, but what I like even more is a letter perhaps from an editor or publisher to say if this is a really special book. And I'm not seduced by freebies or frickery. I'm beyond all that, really. So yeah, and I ask people to email those kinds of things to me as a starting point. But today I went through my September submissions from about, I think it's around 60 publishers. So there's lots of little independent publishers in there. So if you are able to meet the deadlines, then, you know, I do consider everything kind of as equally as I can, really. For the Observer, I would work much closer to the deadline. So my next one goes out, I think, at the end of June. So as long as I had something, you know, in the next couple of weeks, that would be fine, and that can be a proof or a finished copy.
Okay. And Imogen, how do you sort of sort through your TB read pile? Are you seduced by chocolate at all?
I mean, I will eat it, but it won't make any difference. This is the harsh and terrible truth. I have a weakness for a notebook, but again, it doesn't make a difference. And it is far better. Also, can people not wrap anything? Because it's such a lovely idea in principle. But the thing is, you're doing all of that ripping open of a million envelopes. The last thing you want to do is any more unwrapping. And of course, it is just extra material and extra waste. So joyless as it sounds, I plead for no extra wrapping. I work, the Guardian deadline is mid-month for the column that runs at the end of the month, and I'm usually reading about a month in advance. I like proofs or finished copies about a month in advance. Too early, and I find they can get lost. Too late, and they're just too late, and it was better when I had Metro to be able to hold on to things and tuck them in later, but at the moment I don't. The TLS is much more flexible because I more or less set my own deadlines, because I will pitch a roundup and then agree a deadline, and I can go a lot further back for the TLS as well. But for the Guardian, it's always around about a month before publication date would be fab.
Nicolette, how about you?
Well, what I just want to say first is that the publicists have been fantastic. They're always fantastic. They've been fantastic for decades, but particularly through the pandemic. That it's such a thankless task, and they found the ways that they've found to continually promote things and to reach us and so on, despite all the difficulties, have been astonishing. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, there was, you know, you suddenly weren't getting books very much. A lot of dates were moved and so on. But they found so many ways around it that everything is very much back to normal. And and just sort of a round of applause, really. People working in incredibly difficult circumstances, people working at home with their kids, people, you know, it's not been easy. And I think they've done an amazing job. And I think it's always one of those jobs which there's an infinite amount of stuff you can do and without a guarantee of return. So I'm full of admiration. But just the practicalities, I usually go to press about 10 days before the book appears. The review appears, and so I need to have it about a fortnight or so before to give myself at least. When I look at the piles of books on the floor beside me here, the tallest piles at the moment are May and June, which is about right. I do have books that go up to sort of September, but they're just probably going to sit in the corner for longer before I get round to them because there are too many. I do get about, well, I did count once at a busy time of year, and I ended up with about 90 books a week, which I think is probably comparable to Fiona and Imogen. I mean, I could tell you now in April and May, I've made a note to myself of some of the books, remembering that I have in effect 8 books I can mention in a month, so 16 in 2 months. It was a busy month, but there were so many big names and sort of grand favourites in April and May, including you know, people who'd won the Carnegie and the Costa and so on. So there was Sharon Creech, Geraldine McCaughrean, Frank Cottrell Boyce, Hilary McKay, Jonathan Stroud, Brian Conahan, Michelle Paver, David Armand, Charlie Higson, Jenny Valentine, Jill Lewis, Bonnie Sue Hitchcock, Terry Deary, Derek Landy. Then lots of work by people I'd enjoyed in the past, very established authors, people like Anna James, Maz Evans, Patience Agabi, Kevin and Katie Sang, Ellie Fountain, Jenny Pearson, Tom Palmer, Claire Balding, also a big name, Futura Sounder, Rebecca Stead, Kieran Millwood Hargrave. And then there were lots of books that there was a sort of enthusiasm or a buzz or a presentation that I liked or a particular push behind them. And that included books by Mbali M. McKinnon, Melissa Harrison, Kirsty Applebaum, Crystal Sutherland, Akala, Roderick O'Grady, etc., etc. There are more. I had sort of 37 names on my list, but there are actually 73 in the pile for those 2 months. So, and then you think, okay, I'm going to miss some good stuff here because that's how many books are now in contention. So that's just to give people an idea. That's what it's like. And I'm sorry about the ones that I don't, because all those are books that are worth reading and commenting on. And you know, the people that are listening know that they've mentioned other books to me that I was interested in that I haven't happened to mention in that pile. And we don't have the space for it.
And Nicolette, also you mentioned earlier about doing other types of content and other types of articles about children's books. And where does that come from? Does that come from you pitching to an editor saying, I would love to interview this person, or I would love to do an overview of X, Y, and Z? Or do they come to you and ask for something?
A bit of both. But yeah, something I sorted out yesterday, which will be a news story for the Sunday Times. Better not mention it because you don't want to. But anyway, you know, but that was something I pitched and they said yes to. I'm trying to think of things that happened during the pandemic. You know, there were pieces, they were looking for quite optimistic pieces there. So there was a nice one about Quentin Blake drawing rainbows, and there was an interview with Shirley Hughes. And but you know, it does tend to be quite big names. It's very difficult in the nationals, isn't it, to get anything people haven't already heard of, and they've heard of a lot less than we have. So it's yeah, but the important thing is to have an angle that's important, and the angle, of course, during the pandemic was optimism. And also there were online features as well about all the things that authors were doing to keep kids. Suddenly, when children were at home, there was more interest because suddenly everybody realized that actually you do need to keep kids entertained. So it was quite a good year, in fact, for that kind of coverage. As soon as they went back to school, everybody was a bit less interested again.
Yes, that's true. Now, talking about celebrity authors, and I'm not going to ask you guys to kind of say anything controversial, because I know I've spoken to you all separately about it before, and you can see, you know, positives and negatives, and you're all very kind of balanced on it. But I was just wondered about sort of writing about those books in your reviews. Do you sort of think, oh, well, I should write about these books because my readers will want to know about them? Or do you sort of feel like, well, they'll get so much attention anyway, I want to use the little space I have to talk about other people? Imogen, do you want to answer that one?
I mean, it really does go on the quality of the book. If the book is excellent, and I would consider it excellent celebrity author or non-celebrity author, then I'll cover it. If there's nothing of interest about the book, besides the fact that the author is a celebrity, then I won't cover it, because obviously lots of people will be interested in it anyway. And I consider it piously, I consider it my duty to focus on really good books, rather than stuff that is going to get a lot of interest anyway.
Okay. And Fiona, how about you?
Yeah, so for the bookseller, very often I wouldn't receive a reading copy in time to do any more than say it's coming. I do sometimes pull out celebrity books as ones to watch in my previews, if they're perhaps doing something a bit different. You know, if there is perhaps an angle about inclusivity or something like that. Generally in the bookseller, I would just include them in the listings and give the space to others to highlight other things. And actually for the Observer, because I do teen and YA, it haven't been actually that many celebrity books. So it hasn't come up hugely, but if it did, it would be on the same kind of criteria that Imogen has expressed. Yeah.
Fair enough. Now, could you tell us about any upcoming authors or books that you are particularly excited about? I know it's really hard to pick out, you know, just a few, but if you can, possibly. Nicolette, is there anyone you're excited, or maybe even their publisher, a new or young publisher that you're particularly interested in?
That's a good question about publishers. I mean, I'm excited with every post, to be honest. I haven't got tired and jaded about this, and things surprise me all the time. It's very difficult to pick out particular things that the thing I'm enthusiastic about right at this moment is, which I'm about to review, is the new Hilary Mackay, because, you know, she's great. So everybody loves it. It swallows flight. So of course that's terrific. I mean, there are some books that I've heard about that I haven't read yet that sound interesting. I like the sound of I saw the author talking on a presentation for Chicken House about children of the quicksands. Her name is yes, which I haven't actually read it yet, but that did sound very interesting. So I'm going to read it, and I hope.
And Imogen, how about you?
I just had the finished copy of Children of the Quicksands arrive today, just like Nicolette. I mean, it's like a dog hearing a lead rattle. For all of my carping about having to unwrap books, woe is me. I'm still tremendously excited with every post. I cannot wait until September and the new Frances Hardinge, because she is the ultimate I will read her laundry list author. But yes, similarly, I mean, apart from the sense of guilt as I look at my teetering book piles, I also just feel this continual sense of excitement.
Mm-hmm. And Fiona?
I completely agree with that. Every single month, you know, I look forward to doing the new month and all the new things that are coming that are going to that we can get excited about. So yes, that feeling never goes away. And I still think of myself as a bookseller at heart, although it is some years since I have worked for a bookseller. So, you know, on any given day, I can tell you a lot of different books I am excited about. But I've just written August preview for the bookseller, and I'm bowled over by The Upper World by Femi Fudupa, which is a big sci-fi time travel thriller. And I think he is just going to be a massive kind of game-changing name actually in YA fiction, and I got to interview him last week, which was hugely exciting. So that is probably my my biggest kind of tip at the moment. But lots and lots of others on any given day.
It must be quite a nice feeling if you guys are one of the first people to, big up a book, and then it goes on to become really successful, or that author goes on to, have a stellar career. You must feel quite proud.
Yeah, it always feels like just a massive privilege to get to read things early, and I still feel that, you get sent, say, the Hilary Mackay, and it feels, you feel so fortunate to get.
I do remember that somebody sent me a book I liked very much, and in a roundup I said, not so well known as these authors I've been talking about, but destined surely to be, is J.K. Rowling. And I look back at that review and I think, I had no idea.
That's fantastic. I went to a book awards ceremony in Ireland a few years ago, and apparently in Ireland, everyone over there just thought, nah. I met lots of people, kind of librarians and publishers and stuff, who just sort of didn't really see, and they were saying, oh dear, we totally missed that one. So yes, well done.
Apparently I met somebody who was coming back from a literary festival with me on a train, and they said to me, and I'd completely forgotten this conversation, but he said to me, I asked you if you could recommend anything for my children. And I said, well, apparently I said there are two books I've read recently that I really liked. One is called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and the other one is called Northern Lights. And he said he'd written them both down. when nobody told
them. These are pure books, yes.
I also find that the flip side of it very sad, though, that when there is something that you really love and really recommend, and then it doesn't get picked up, by any retailers, and it kind of fades away. And I find that, just so heartbreaking. And it does happen all the time, because there is such massive competition for very few retailer slots now. So that's very sad. Very sad part.
Yes, we've had that experience too.
I've got a couple of questions here from the audience. If you're watching this and you've got questions, please put them in the chat box. First one is from Marissa Noel, to all panelists. Imogen, you might have something to say about this, but she said she would love to understand how indie authors can gain attention from you guys. Is there any opportunity? Do you ever look at sort of independently published books? What's your feelings when it comes to that?
It is hard because, Nicolette gave quite a good flavour of just how crazy the post situation is, and that is, that's the big five and the big hitting independent publishers. And as Fiona says, if publicists don't pull out the top picks, then there's just so much you get swept away in it. I do look at my emails. I do not always answer my emails, for which I apologise. But again, I get an awful lot, and to answer them as they deserve would take so much time that I couldn't read. So it's a very tricky one, because I don't automatically rule stuff out, but there's an awful lot of noise that you're contending with already. In order to make your voice heard. I would say that having the help of a publicist for a bit is quite handy, because sometimes indie authors are just not aware of, maybe how to put together a good press release and covering letter and so on, and it can help to have some guidance with that, but that obviously isn't within everyone's reach, and is a bit exclusive by itself. I'm afraid that just it is a function of this enormously oversaturated market that it is very, very hard. And again, remembering how few slots we have for the breadth of stuff that's published, it is harder to get noticed by print critics. And I would often, suggest find the bloggers who really specialize in your kind of work. And talk to them, because they're anyway more likely to be able to give you more in-depth and thought-through reviews.
Okay. Nicolette, do Book Brunch run a competition for indie authors?
I'm not sure about it. Sorry, not quite. I know I'm supposed to know, but shall I speak to the husband?
Yes, Marissa, I think there are quite, like Imogen said, there are definitely bloggers in this area, and there are also magazines and competitions.
Yes.
So it's always worth looking out those sort of things, because it's all, attention and reviews, and it's all helpful, isn't it? There's a question from Naomi Weeks, who says, do you prefer to be contacted by email about receiving a book before it comes in the post, or are you happy just to receive that information along with AI sheets, cover letters? Fiona, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm just happy to receive it. I don't need sort of an email first. That's fine. But by all means, do email. But as Imogen said, we do get so many. We don't always reply sort of immediately or at all, but certainly look at everything that will come in. Yes.
Aoife Lonergan says, how do you as professional reviewers feel about bloggers? Well, I think you guys are all pretty friendly with bloggers and you love what they do. I mean, Nicolette, that's right, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. I don't read blogs as often as I should, but that's possibly because you want to form your own opinion about a book. But there are some that I do, or have at least come across. Who can I recommend? I mean, some that write interesting pieces, like an awfully big blog adventure, ABBA. Love Reading for Kids, obviously, is very good. Minerva Reads, Picture Books Blogger, The Book Sniffer, they're all people that I've admired, things that they've done. Yes, very happy that they're out there and covering ground that we don't always get a chance to cover, and sometimes the same, but the more the better.
Yeah, this all makes for kind of a richer landscape, really. And I love reading not only blogs, but sort of any reviews anywhere, really. So things like Topster, or, I just really sit and read Amazon reviews, Waterstones reviews, I just love to get all the kind of, different opinions from different kinds of people, really, in the same way that, you kind of like to overhear people in bookshops and libraries and
I agree with all of that, but I will put in one modified note of hate and bring the tone down, which is I am not always very keen on Goodreads because it is sometimes the place where people pop up and say, I did not like this character, particularly this female character who dared to be dislikable, and now I'm going to rubbish the book. Yes, I have issues with it, and I would strongly suggest that authors stay away from Goodreads at all costs. But otherwise, yes, please, to everybody reviewing and thinking about books and talking about books and all the rest of it, the more the merrier.
Definitely. Sophie Kirtley would like to know if you think there's any hope for children's books to achieve greater coverage in the national press in terms of column inches. Imogen, your face like.
And then we did this looking into SF Said and I did this looking into with Cover Kids books. We went through with our rulers and did I can't remember, it was a month or 2 months worth of all the broadsheets and all the papers and how many column inches there were, and then some indefatigable students did the same thing a year on, and if anything it might have expanded very slightly, or it might have got slightly worse. The thing is, I can't say I have given up shouting for it, because I have shouted for so long that I've gone hoarse and no one has paid the blindest bit of attention. It's not within my power to change it. I wish it were, but it isn't. I've given up pitching half the stuff I used to pitch, because I know that I can't convince people that it's of interest, even though it really is. And that is dispiriting and tiresome. But for me, I am committed to working within what I have while I have it. So I would love there to be inordinate quantities of space for children's books all the time. I would love the halcyon days when the TLS used to have this great big multi-page children's book supplement, but we're not there, and I don't know if we will return to those days, sadly.
And when you were talking to your editors about this, what do they say? I mean, why can't we have more? What are the reasons?
I think, Nicolette, you and I might have talked about this in the past, that predominantly as well in the past, you often get editors who are men who either don't have children or are not really participating in the business of bringing up children, and don't see the relevance. They see children's books as some kind of twinkly little nice add-on, maybe, but a niche interest, if anything. And this is sadly, it's hard to shift. The second you come across an editor who's actually keen on children's books and just sort of, literature more broadly, then you're away. But until you get past the gatekeeper, then you're stiffed.
The only thing I agree with everything that Imogen has said, but I still hold out hope. I have had people say to me, people read the Sunday papers in order to get away from their kids. But I think there's a failure there to understand what children's books are, and that is literature, that they don't, and art. And they don't realize that these are objects that are of interest to all sorts of adults for all kinds of reasons, as well as being of interest to children. Not only that adults read them as well as children do, and certainly that's true of as we know from Harry Potter and so on. There's an awful lot of crossover. So I think the problem is people who actually have the wrong notion of what children's books offer, and also what they miss from a journalistic point of view. And this is why I'm sort of slightly optimistic, is that I think publicists can actually make some ground. What they miss is the stories behind the stories. Children's books are not all about somebody, the kind of thing that children say, to authors, where do you get your ideas from? There's not just some sort of very limited amount of stuff that can be said about them. They're often, as we know, about the big subjects. They're about political issues. They're about environmental issues. They're about social issues. They're about big emotions, love, grief, loss, war, all that kind of thing. But they're also, it seems to me, about the stories behind the inspiration for an author, a place that they went. I don't know, if you think of a book like how Private Peaceful led to a question in the House of Commons about whether we should have pardons for soldiers who had been shot for cowardice during the First World War. There's often a story behind which is much bigger than the story inside the covers, or at least the story inside the covers has ramifications that go beyond. And I think if you can find that angle, you can then reach the news pages. And sometimes it's the story around it, the story of what happened to the author, the place that's associated with it, the circumstances. Even the room in which it was written. There are ways of finding angles into the paper that go beyond the prejudice of the editor who thinks that children's books are small and of no interest. And if you can find those things, you could have, somewhere at the back of my mind, I think you could have sort of magazine programs that were, small documentary features about things that happened around children's books. We know how exciting our worlds are. The interview that Fiona just did, I bet there were things in that interview that were above and beyond what was the story itself. And if you could somehow find a way to have those things covered, the story needs to be pitched in a way that means it can reach beyond. And I think there's scope for that. And there may be scope in other media. And it's going to happen one day, even though I've been shouting even longer than Imogen because I'm older. I think there is still potential. There's a lot of untapped potential, and not from some kind of worthy point of view, just from a journalistic point of view. I'll shut up now.
No, it's all very interesting. Fiona, what sort of untapped potential for coverage of children's books can you see? What would you like to see?
Yeah, I don't know really. I mean, I think in terms of sort of the broadsheet media, it hasn't sort of got terribly better or worse now in the past few years. I think everything Nicolette says about the angle is true, but I know how hard it is to get those pieces to be commissioned. What I do think there's still lots of potential for children's books to be covered in sort of other types of media. And maybe we do, publicists maybe just need to be thinking about other sort of social media children's books on Instagram more, which does seem very to be quite untapped. I think, I don't know how you do that, but I think that that is something to be explored. Yeah, but it's we would all love to see a lot more of it. We would all love to be able to sort of write these much more sort of critical, expansive reviews. So it remains a very, very tricky topic, I think.
And Fiona, you're very good at sort of tweeting out not only the articles that you write, but also other books that you have enjoyed that perhaps you don't necessarily have space for in the bookseller or elsewhere. Do you see Twitter as a sort of extension of your journalism?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think I've been on Twitter a lot less, I think, during the pandemic, because it's it hasn't always been the most optimistic place, I think. But I generally see Twitter in particular as a very sort of useful place to do all those kind of extra bits. So when I'm in the right sort of frame of mind, I really enjoy sort of engaging and doing those kind of tweets. Yeah.
Imogen, how about you? Are you a fan of social media or not really?
Well, just like Fiona, it's a right frame of mind thing. I would love to do a lot more, but I find that it's, yes, when I'm feeling all perky and hopped up and I've got my list of absolute, I couldn't squeeze them in, but they were so good, I must talk about them, and I'm ready. And also, hopefully, I've looked up everybody's Twitter handles ahead of time, so I feel very prepared. Then I enjoy doing that. But when I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed, which this past year I have been feeling quite a lot, and as Fiona says, again, it's as much as I can do to sort of pip on, look at my notifications, see that a terrible something is brewing somewhere, and pip straight off again. So here's to spring and lots of glorious books, and hopefully being on Twitter to do a lot more recommending, because it is lovely when it's also, there's fun to the skill of it as well, trying to distill down a sense of a book into a tweet, not even the tiny little space you get in a paper review, but into a tweet. And it's quite a buzz if you manage to do a good job and the author responds cheerily to what you do. So that's a selfish reason, but I enjoy it for that reason too.
How about Instagram? Are any of you on Instagram?
Not really.
I am, but only with this guy. Literally.
Oh, I'm so glad he arrived.
Horrible. Yes, I think the problem with all of these platforms like Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and TikTok, it could be a full-time job in itself. I mean, I've been talking to people about TikTok and trying to learn about what book content there is on there, but it's so overwhelming.
I do sometimes use Twitter when I notice a sort of a trend or a sort of group of books together that you think, well, I'm probably only going to be able to review one of this kind, but isn't it interesting that there are all these going on? So you might tweet, a floor full of inclusive books, for instance, books we were talking about where that's apparent from the cover, or books on a particular theme that have all come out at the same time. I might just use Twitter just to sort of say to people, oh, look, this is kind of happening, just because there's nowhere else to draw attention to that. So it's kind of overflow journalism for me, I think, Twitter.
Yeah.
I think I've just got time for a couple more quick questions. So have you ever been pressured to write a review of a book you didn't like? Imogen?
Yes.
Fiona?
I haven't actually. I have had things suggested that I might look at, but I have been able to say, no, I do not wish to write about that.
Yes, I would say I've been commissioned rather than pressured. But sometimes Andrew Holgate will say to me, this is in the news, what do you think? And I've said, I don't like it. And he said, okay, fine.
So he trusts your independent judgment.
Yeah, it's very rare for something. I mean, sometimes, you know, when it's really kind of newsworthy, you might cover it. And I have been quite rude in my time about Madonna and Paul McCartney, you know, where it's something, you know, again, a celebrity turning their hand to something that didn't work well.
Interesting.
But that wasn't pressure, exactly.
No, you were
it was just kind of newsworthy.
Yeah. So my final question would be, is there one thing that we might have covered this, but if there was one thing that publishers could do to make your life easier, what would it be? Nicolette, do you want to go first?
Yes. Well, one thing that both Fiona and Imogen have mentioned, you know, forgive me for not answering all the emails in person. Those emails that say, I'd be glad to have your opinion of this, can't do that. I've only got time to write the reviews of the ones that you are actually going to write. I can't write as well something about it. But the main thing is put the date on the press release.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Because everything depends on that week. Yeah. I always end up with a pile where I'm going through Amazon trying to check. And then sometimes the date isn't up to date and things go out the wrong week because either they got separated or it just wasn't there at all.
I like the date on the proof.
On the proof. I'm with you there, because then at least there's, but then sometimes when the finished copy arrives, you know, you have to make sure that you can match them all up together and find it on the pile, whatever. So yes, dates, please. Without which, if it's undated and I don't get round to looking it up, it's gone at that point.
Yeah.
Okay. Imogen, how about you?
Well, pay for advertising in papers because that helps to safeguard the tiny amount of review space there already is, and publish fewer but better books. That would be glorious. And now this is really cheeky because this is 3 things and you said 1. But I would quite like publishers to consider everybody switching to dyslexia friendly or accessible fonts, because if 1 in 7 kids is dyslexic, then, you know, why not improve the chances of reaching all those kids who potentially might not be? But that's more of a stretch.
And Fiona, is there anything else?
Yeah, I mean, the point I was going to raise was what Imogen has just said about, you know, publishing fewer books, which does sound a bit miserable, really. But I think, as I said earlier, it's, you know, so heartbreaking when you see, you know, these fantastic books every month that are just not going to go anywhere. So I think publish fewer books, but publish them with, you know, with more care and attention and with a better marketing budget. You know, better jackets, all of that really.
I'm less sure about that.
Okay.
I mean, I because I think the question then is, what do you lose? And there's a book out there for everybody, and I mean, I think publish them with care and attention. I think you're right about that, Fiona. But if you're going to end up putting more marketing spend behind, you may end up only having the dead certs and losing the newcomers. And
it's so tricky. Yeah, I mean, this past year, the bookseller previews have been on average, I think, about 40% bigger every month, you know, than the previous year. And I'm about to do, you know, the September preview, which is going to be the biggest one I've ever done, I think. So, you know, it's just getting enormous. So yeah, it's
perhaps what they need to do is be selective, which is what you said earlier. Yeah. And I think I like this too, when publicists really do pick a few things that they think you've got a chance of covering. There's a danger that you miss something that you might have found interesting yourself. But on the other hand, once you trust certain publicists, that's a very helpful thing to do, but it whittles things down a bit.
Yeah.
I was going to say there's one thing that they have already done quite recently, which I think is fantastic. A little while ago, we were making a bit of a fuss about plastic packaging. And now absolutely everything seems to arrive in entirely recyclable cardboard. Thank you. I'm able to say thank you. Fantastic. Made all the difference.
Well, on that lovely optimistic note, it's nearly 9 o'clock, so we have got to log off now. But thank you all so much for taking part in this event today. Gemma Cooper has just said in the notes that it was really interesting. I thought it was really interesting too. If you guys who are watching this have any questions, you can tweet me at Charlotte L. Eyre, and I will do a rundown of this on Twitter tomorrow anyway, with all the main points. So if you've missed anything important, it should be, I'll do something on Twitter tomorrow. Oh yes, Nicolette?
Can I add one tiny thing that I really did want to say?
Yeah.
And that is, when we were talking about fewer books, there's one thing I want more of, and that is books in translation. Because I chaired the In Other Words initiative at Book Trust a couple of years running, and I really do believe that we're not open enough to the rest of the world, especially as we're closing down into this isolated little island. It would be nice to have more of those voices. So sorry, that was not related to anything really, but I had wanted to say it.
Imogen, Fiona, any final words from you?
Just big thank you, Charlotte, for organising and being a fantastic chair. This was so much fun. It's lovely to see all your faces, albeit on Zoom.
Yeah, and I would just sort of echo what Nicolette said about how hard the publicists have worked over the past year. And I do sometimes think publicists are you know, some of the least celebrated people in publishing, and they work and care so much. So thank you again for that.
Right, I'm going to log off then. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.